She was a teenager in the royal court of Zazzau when she first picked up a weapon, not as a curiosity, but as a calling. Queen Amina would go on to conquer more of West Africa than almost any ruler of her era, commanding armies across decades of near-continuous war. Almost no one outside Nigeria can name her. Born around 1533 into the royal house of Zazzau, Amina did not drift toward power. She trained for it. As a child, she was brought up in her grandfather's court, instructed carefully in political and military matters. At 16, she was named Magagia, heir apparent. She was already mastering swordsmanship, archery, and horseback riding within the Zazzau cavalry, earning the respect of the military elite long before any throne was in sight. Then her brother died. In 1576, Amina ascended. Within 3 months, she was at war. What followed was not a single campaign or a fortunate decade. It was 34 years of near-continuous military aggression, an entire reign spent on the march. She pushed Zazzau's territory southward to the Niger and Benue rivers, east toward the Jukun territories, and north along the corridors that fed into the trans-Saharan trade. The cities of Kano and Katsina, themselves major Hausa powers, were forced to pay tribute. She commanded an army reportedly 20,000 foot soldiers and 1,000 cavalry strong, and she did not direct it from behind walls. She led the cavalry herself into battle, a practice uncommon for rulers of any gender in that era. But the most lasting thing Amina built wasn't a battlefield victory. It was the infrastructure of permanent conquest. Every camp she established, every city she took, was required to raise earthen fortifications around it. These became known as the Ganuwar Amina, Amina's walls. A 15-kilometer wall surrounding what is now the modern city of Zaria dates directly back to her order. These were not decorative. They were functional military architecture, securing the boundaries of a growing empire and protecting the trade routes that ran through it. Remnants of those walls still stand in northern Nigeria today, which means her empire left a physical scar on the landscape that outlasted every attempt to forget her. And the economy behind those walls was just as deliberate as the walls themselves. Zazzau under Amina controlled the kola nut routes, the leather trade, the salt corridors, the arteries of the entire Sahel economy. Tribute flowed in from subjugated regions. The conquered didn't just surrender land, they fed Zazzau's commercial dominance. Her campaigns weren't raids, they were the systematic construction of an economic network, enforced by military presence and bounded by stone and earth. This is the scale of what was built, not a regional skirmish, not a lucky reign. Zazzau under Amina reached its greatest territorial extent in history, an empire assembled through 3.5 decades of disciplined, strategic, relentless expansion. And here is where the story sharpens into something uncomfortable. The Kano Chronicle, one of the most significant written historical records produced in the Hausa world, incorporating earlier documentary material into its late 19th century composition, names Amina explicitly. It records that she conquered as far as Nupe and Kwarafa, that she collected tribute from far and wide, and that she ruled for 34 years. An earlier Arabic source, the historian Muhammad Bello, writing around 1812, calls her the first to establish government among them. These are not oral whispers passed down through generations of uncertain transmission. They are named, documented, written records. That matters enormously. Because the argument that would later be used to diminish Amina, that her story was too rooted in legend to be taken seriously as history, cannot survive contact with the Kano Chronicle. The evidence was always there. Her name was in the record. The walls were still standing. So the question is not whether Amina existed, or whether she conquered, or whether the scale of what she built was real. The record is unambiguous on all 3 counts. The question is why, with written documentation in hand and earthwork fortifications still visible on the ground, her name was systematically left out of the history the modern world inherited. And who made that choice? The Kano Chronicle names her directly. Written evidence, walls still standing, yet her name still didn't make it into the history most of us were taught. Did you learn about Queen Amina in school? Drop your answer in the comments below, because the gap between what the record shows and what got taught is exactly where this story gets darker. Amina's name was in the Kano Chronicle, her walls were still standing in the ground, and she was still left out. That doesn't happen by accident, it happens by design. When British colonial administrators moved into northern Nigeria in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, they brought with them a hierarchy of what counted as history. Written records ranked above oral tradition. Arabic and European scholarly texts ranked above Hausa vernacular accounts. The assumption, rarely stated but consistently applied, was that if a story lived primarily in the mouths of people rather than on the pages of manuscripts, it was legend, interesting perhaps, but not history, not evidence. That distinction did real damage. Amina's story survived most vividly in Hausa oral tradition, passed through praise singers, preserved in the memory of the communities she had built and fortified. When colonial record keepers encountered that tradition, they classified it as folklore. The walls were still there, the chronicle reference was there. But the interpretive framework that colonial historians brought to the region was not built to take a woman ruler in a pre-Islamic Hausa power structure seriously as a historical subject. So the evidence was noted and then set aside. Compare that to how Idris Aluma of Kanem was treated. The reign of Idris Aluma is the best documented of all the Saifawa rulers, owing to his chief imam, Ahmad ibn Fatuwa, who recorded the first 12 years of his reign. That documentation, written in Arabic, produced by an Islamic scholarly figure, was exactly the kind of source that colonial-era historians knew how to value. A male ruler, embedded in Islamic institutional structures, with a court scholar producing Arabic manuscripts, that was legible to the historiographical machinery the British brought with them. Amina, a woman ruling through military force, whose reign and power were less embedded in the kind of Arabic manuscript-producing Islamic scholarly institutions that surrounded rulers like Idris Aluma, was not. This is the mechanism. It was not that colonial historians looked at Amina's record and decided it was insufficient. It was that the infrastructure they used to evaluate records was built to privilege exactly the kinds of sources that documented men like Idris Aluma, and to discount exactly the kinds of sources that preserved Amina. Oral tradition classified as legend. Women's power classified as myth. The result looked like a neutral scholarly judgment. It was not neutral. The 20th century began to correct this. Scholars who took Hausa oral sources seriously started re-examining what the written record actually said. The Kano Chronicle, composed in the late 19th century but incorporating earlier documentary material, names Amina explicitly and records that she conquered as far as Nupe and Kwarafa and collected tribute from far and wide. That is not ambiguous. That is a named ruler, in a named chronicle, with specific territorial claims that match the physical evidence on the ground. A statue of Amina was eventually erected at the National Arts Theatre in Lagos, a belated physical acknowledgement that the erasure had happened and that it needed to be answered. But as of 2025-2026, Amina still barely appears in global history curricula. European rulers of the same century, some of them far less documented, their empires far smaller, fill the pages of standard world history textbooks. The asymmetry is not a gap in the evidence. It is a gap in whose evidence was ever treated as worth preserving. Amina conquered West Africa. She built walls that still stand. She left written documentation in the record, and then a different kind of infrastructure, not military, not economic, but historiographical, was used to conquer her memory. The Kano Chronicle survived. The walls survived. Amina survived in the oral tradition of every community that lived inside what she built. History tried to bury her under its own architecture of credibility. So far, it has not fully succeeded. Subscribe for more history that was hidden in plain sight, and watch this one next.